Over the course of this series, we've created an entire MVC based framework which has been specifically used to create a league table. This league table is completely functional, including providing details of the team's future fixtures, results, how individual players are performing, as well as providing a means for a referee to input data, including things like the scores and goal scorers, which then automatically feeds through and populates all of the other tables and fixtures within the rest of the project, for example, the league table. One of the primary goals of creating this project was to explore Polymer, which at the time this project was created was relatively new still. And 4,500 lines of code later, I think we've done that well enough. Although there are obviously things that we could continue to explore, we do have a good enough understanding of Polymer and how it works. And so before we end out this series, I wanted to give my thoughts about Polymer in its current state, as well as highlighting some areas where I hope there is improvement in the future. The version of Polymer that I used was 0.50, which was the first public release of Polymer. And since the beginning of this series, there have been updates to Polymer which have addressed some of the issues we encountered during the series itself. But before we do that, I just want to highlight the fact that the entire project is available on GitHub at github.com/stretchprojects/stretchleague. If you want to explore the project yourself or look at any of the files in more detail, you're more than welcome to do so. So what were the main points that I took away from this project, specifically about Polymer and web components? Well, overall I was very pleased with it, especially when you consider that it's so early in development. The first minor issue we encountered was importing elements, which was not very intuitive to begin with, but as I did spend more time developing the project, it did become more and more intuitive. I deliberately chose a data-heavy project because I knew from previous experience working with templates, specifically within JavaScript, that it can be very difficult to work with, especially when you're dealing with complex data in tables. We did see this when I passed JSON encoded data across in our first few videos, which was destined to be displayed in tables. The fact that I had to encode data into JSON only for it to be decoded within the template itself was a very redundant step, and it eventually led to us passing across entire tables pre-formatted using PHP. If I'm going to need to use PHP to pre-format the data, it does beg the question why I would need to use templates in the first place. This is still an issue, especially for big data tables, but less of an issue when it comes to things like teams. Here, where we only pass across a very specific number of pieces of information. With regards to the look and feel of Polymer, the responsiveness of it by default was very welcome. Things like hiding menus by default when a page is too small to display both the menu and the contents of the page, as well as all of the functionality associated with that, is very useful and will save a lot of people a lot of time. There were some other issues, for example, with things like input elements. Because of the way Polymer has coded its buttons, it's not really very easy to create things like a submit button using the paper elements provided by Polymer. You can of course attach things like JavaScript events, which will submit forms for you. But one of the big things about templates is that they're supposed to be easy to use. And the fact that you would have to do this for every button which you wanted to act as a submit button is not really in line with that spirit. The same was true for things like the fab button. We didn't play around with that too much, but it did have the same problems whereby it would only act as a button itself, not a submit button. And it wasn't by accident that we had these ugly looking select boxes. There are a whole host of elements which are not currently stylized within Polymer, select boxes being one of them. Now these things that I'm talking about with regards to style, so the submit buttons and missing elements, they are things that can be worked around. But one of the biggest things that draws people to template engines is the fact that they are supposed to be easy to use. And at the moment, having to work around missing functionality does undermine that philosophy. Now it is worth reiterating the fact that it was a very early build of Polymer that I used for this project, and since the majority of the project was created, Polymer has been updated, which does include additional functionality. And so I will keep an eye on the project as it develops and try to integrate it into more real-world scenarios. This video also marks the very end of this series. I will be doing more web development series in the future, so make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss those.